There's a version of you that wakes up tired, says yes to everything, and lets the day happen to him instead of shaping it. He's not lazy. He's not weak. He's just comfortable, and comfortable is dangerous. Because it never announces itself as the enemy. It just quietly costs you 2 years, then 5, then a decade. And one day you look back and ask where the time went. Today we're not talking about self-improvement in the vague, motivational poster sense. We're talking about something more specific and more uncomfortable. Killing the old you on purpose, one habit at a time. Not a personality transplant, not becoming someone else. Just a slow, deliberate execution of the parts of you that are keeping the rest of you stuck. 10 habits. And for each one, we're going to look at a real moment from the life of a Stoic philosopher who actually lived it, not as theory, but as something they were forced to practice when it mattered. Stay with me to the end, because the last one is the one most people quietly refuse to do, and it's usually the one that matters most. Wake up early. The old you negotiates with the alarm clock every single morning. 5 more minutes turns into 15, and 15 turns into rushing out the door, already behind schedule, already reacting instead of leading. That negotiation feels small, but it's not. It's the first vote you cast for the kind of day you're going to have. The new you doesn't negotiate, because the decision was already made the night before the tiredness had a chance to argue back. Waking up early was never really about the extra hours on the clock. It's about winning your first battle of the day before the world has even asked anything of you yet. You prove something to yourself in that moment, quietly, with no audience, and that proof carries into everything that follows. Lose that first battle, and you spend the rest of the day playing defense, always one step behind your own life. Marcus Aurelius was, by his own admission, not a morning person. In his private notebook, what we now know as Meditations, he describes lying in bed, reluctant to get up, and having to talk himself into it. He reminds himself that he's a human being, built to work, the way the rest of nature does its work without complaint. The bees, the birds, the ants, all rise and do what they were made for. He wasn't writing this for an audience. He was the most powerful man in the world, an emperor, and he still had to argue himself out of bed like anyone else. The habit didn't come from natural discipline. It came from a daily internal negotiation. He won more often than he lost. Learn to say no. Every yes you didn't mean was a small betrayal of your own time. You said yes to the favor you didn't have room for. Yes to the meeting that didn't need you. Yes to the version of the plan that worked for everyone except you. Each one felt small in the moment. Stacked together, they're the reason your own goals keep getting pushed to later. The old you said yes to keep the peace, because conflict, even the small, polite, kind, felt more expensive than giving away another evening. The new you understands that peace built on resentment isn't peace at all. It's a debt that comes due eventually, usually as burnout or quiet bitterness. Saying no isn't rejection, and it isn't selfishness either. It's you finally putting a price on your own attention, the same way you'd expect anyone else to protect something valuable. Cato the Younger built his entire political reputation on refusal. In a Rome soaked in bribery, favor trading, and shifting alliances, Cato became known as the one man who couldn't be bought and wouldn't bend not to Julius Caesar, not to the Senate, not to old friends asking for a quiet exception. He said no to Caesar's rise when saying yes would have been safer and more profitable. He cost him political power, comfort, and eventually his life. But the reason his name survived the centuries isn't that he was clever, it's that his no actually meant something, because he was willing to pay for it. Discipline yourself. Motivation is a mood. It shows up when the sun's out, when you're inspired, when someone just said something that lit a fire under you, and it leaves, exactly as unpredictably as it arrived. If you build your life around waiting for it, you'll spend half your life waiting. Discipline doesn't ask how you feel. It shows up on schedule, in the plain, unglamorous version of the task. On the days you don't feel like it at all, which, statistically, is most days. The old you waited to feel ready before starting anything, which meant a lot of things never got started. The new you built a system small, repeatable, boring, that runs whether the mood is right or not. That's the actual, unremarkable difference between people who finish things and people who are still talking about starting them a year later. Musonius Rufus, sometimes called the Roman Socrates, taught that philosophy wasn't something you understood, it was something you trained. The way an athlete trains a body. He pushed his students toward physical hardship on purpose. Simple food, cold, manual effort, discomfort chosen deliberately rather than avoided. Not because suffering was noble in itself, but because a person who can handle small, chosen discomfort builds the muscle to handle the discomfort life hands them without asking. His students didn't become disciplined by feeling inspired. They became disciplined by repeating small, unglamorous physical and mental exercises until the habit outlasted the mood. Embrace your fears. Fear doesn't disappear when you get older, richer, or more accomplished, it just changes its outfit. The fear of failure becomes the fear of losing what you built. The fear of rejection becomes the fear of irrelevance. It never actually leaves. It just gets better at disguises. The old you waited for fear to go away before acting, which meant waiting forever. Because that's not how fear works. The new you does the thing scared, sends the message with shaking hands, starts the thing with no guarantee it'll work, not because the fear vanished, but because you stopped treating it as a stop sign and started treating it as background noise. Fear was never the obstacle. Waiting for it to disappear was. Epictetus began his life enslaved. As a young man, his leg was broken, some accounts say, by a master abusing him. Others describe it differently, but the outcome was the same. He lived the rest of his life with a permanent limp. He had every reason to be consumed by resentment and fear of what more could be taken from him. Instead, once he gained his freedom, he built an entire philosophy around one core distinction. Some things are within your control, and some things are not. And your peace depends entirely on knowing which is which. His body was never fully his to control. His judgment about his situation always was. He didn't wait for fear or hardship to end before teaching, walking, or living fully. He built his whole framework around functioning despite them. Believe you can do it, not the hollow hype, dash yourself, dash up, dash in, dash, the dash mirror kind of belief. Belief built from evidence. The same way you'd trust a business partner who's shown up for you 100 times before. Every time you kept a small promise to yourself, even one nobody else witnessed. You added a data point to the case for who you actually are. The old you needed permission or validation from other people before believing anything good about himself. The new you has a track record he trusts, built one kept promise at a time. None of them dramatic, all of them adding up. That's the entire mechanism behind real confidence. Not a feeling you manufacture, but a case you build through repetition. Cleanthes arrived in Athens with almost nothing and became a student of Zeno, the founder of Stoicism. He had no wealth and no patron, so by night he carried water for other people and worked physically demanding jobs. And by day he sat and studied philosophy. For years, nobody would have looked at him and predicted greatness. He was, quite literally, the water carrier who studied on the side. He didn't need anyone else's belief in him. He kept showing up, night after night, class after class, until the evidence of his own persistence became undeniable. He eventually succeeded Zeno and led the entire Stoic school. Nothing about his early life suggested it was coming. His belief wasn't a mood, it was a habit he built, one unglamorous night shift at a time. If you have watched till this extent, thank you. Focus on the present. The old you lived in two places that don't actually exist. The past, which is already gone and can't be edited, and the future, which hasn't arrived and is mostly a story you're rehearsing in your head. Both are comfortable hiding spots, because neither one requires you to do anything right now. The new you understands that the only place life actually happens is right here, in this hour, with this task in front of you. Regret and anxiety both do the same trick. They pull your attention out of the one place where you actually have any power. Everything else, all the what if, and back then, is just a story. This hour is real. Marcus Aurelius wrote most of Meditations, not in a quiet study, but on military campaigns near the empire's northern frontier, often in the middle of war, disease, and the daily grind of command. He wasn't reflecting from a place of comfort and leisure. He was writing to himself in the middle of the chaos, reminding himself, entry after entry, to deal with the task directly in front of him instead of the enormous, overwhelming weight of the whole empire or the war. He couldn't control the war's outcome or the plague moving through his camps. He could control how he handled the next hour, the next decision, the next conversation. That narrowing of focus, repeated daily, is most of what the book actually is. Stop beating yourself up. Self-criticism feels productive. It feels like accountability, like you're being hard on yourself because you care about doing better. Most of the time, it's not that, it's paralysis wearing a disguise, a way of performing guilt instead of actually changing anything. The old you replayed every mistake on a loop, like the punishment itself was the point. The new you treats a mistake as information, a piece of data you extract, the lesson from once, and then set down and stop carrying. You don't need to hate yourself into growth. You need to notice, adjust, and move That's the whole process, minus the theatrics. Seneca described a nightly habit he'd learned from his teacher, Sextius. At the end of each day, before sleep, he'd review everything he'd said and done, asking himself plainly where he'd fallen short, not to punish himself, but to correct course for tomorrow. He compared it to a judge reviewing a case, calm and factual, not a prosecutor looking for someone to condemn. The point of the review wasn't guilt, it was information he could actually use the next day. He did this consistently, as a discipline, not as an emotional spiral, which is exactly the distinction most people miss when they mistake self-punishment for self-improvement. Make a list of tasks for the day. An unplanned day doesn't stay empty, it fills itself with whatever's loudest, notifications, other people's emergencies, whatever's easiest to react to in the moment. By the time you look up, the day is gone, and none of it was actually yours. The old you reacted all day and called it being busy. The new you decided in advance what actually mattered. So the day had a shape before it even started. A short list, written the night before or first thing in the morning, is a small act of authorship over your own hours, and it's the difference between a day that happened to you and a day you actually ran. Epictetus taught his students to rehearse the day ahead of time, to know, before stepping outside, roughly what they'd face and how they intended to meet it, rather than walking out unprepared and getting emotionally ambushed by the first difficulty that showed up. He compared the untrained mind to someone walking into a wrestling match without having trained for it, surprised by every move because they never prepared for what was coming. A person who plans the shape of their day, even loosely, walks into it already braced and oriented. Instead of discovering the day's demands one ambush at a time, create a vision or plan for your life without a direction. Effort just spins in place. You can be exhausted at the end of the year and still not be able to say what any of it was for. Motion isn't the same as progress, no matter how tired it makes you. The old you was busy. The new you is busy toward something specific, even if that something is loosely sketched and gets revised along the way. That difference, a direction, even an imperfect one, is what turns a year of effort into a year of actual progress instead of a year of noise. Zeno of Citium was a merchant before he was ever a philosopher. As the story goes, he lost a valuable cargo in a shipwreck, his entire livelihood gone in one event completely outside his control. He ended up in Athens with no plan and no trade, and by chance wandered into a bookshop and then into conversations with philosophers that reshaped the entire direction of his life. He didn't rebuild the old plan, he built an entirely new one out of the wreckage. And that new vision eventually became an entire school of philosophy that's still being talked about over 2,000 years later. The shipwreck wasn't the story. What he built with clear intention afterward was, be ready to leave toxic relationships. This is the hardest one on the list, and it's the one most people skip past fastest, which is exactly why it's last, and why it needed the most room here. The old you stayed in dynamics that drained him out of loyalty to what things used to be, or out of fear that walking away made him the villain of the story. The new you understands something quieter and harder. Loyalty to a memory isn't the same thing as loyalty to yourself. People change, seasons end, and sometimes the most disciplined thing you can do isn't waking up earlier or making a better list, it's finally admitting a relationship stopped serving either person a long time ago. Killing the old you sometimes means outgrowing the people who only ever knew that version of you and who have no idea how to relate to the one you're becoming. Seneca wrote directly to a friend about how deliberately he chose who he spent time with, warning that spending time around bitter or corrosive people leaves a residue on you, whether you notice it happening or not. The way standing near smoke leaves a smell on your clothes, even if you never got close to the fire itself. He wasn't talking about cutting people off out of coldness. He was talking about protecting the direction of your own character, because who you sit with regularly shapes who you become, slowly and without your permission if you're not paying attention. Choosing distance from a corrosive relationship wasn't, to him, cruelty. It was basic self-preservation, the same as stepping out of smoke you didn't need to be standing in. Marcus Aurelius wrote his own private notebook, what we now call Meditations, for exactly this reason, not for an audience, not to publish it. He wrote it to talk himself back into becoming the man he wanted to be, one page at a time, because he knew the old version of himself would keep showing up uninvited if he didn't. Every person in this video had a real, specific moment where the easy version of themselves was available, and they chose the harder one instead, not once, dramatically, but repeatedly. In ordinary moments, nobody was watching. Cato refusing a bribe, Epictetus separating what he could and couldn't control, Cleanthes carrying water at night so he could study by day. None of it was a single, heroic act. It was a habit, repeated until it became identity. None of these 10 things are new. Every generation rediscovers them and repackages them as a hack or a life rule. But the Stoics understood something most self-help content leaves out. You don't kill your old self once, in one dramatic morning. You kill him quietly, every single day, in decisions nobody's watching and nobody will ever know about. That repetition, not the intensity of any one moment, is the entire practice. If any part of this hit something in you, hit subscribe. This channel exists for exactly this fight. See you in the next one.